When we picture royalty, we imagine glittering crowns, magnificent palaces, and families destined to rule. For centuries, kings and queens worked tirelessly to appear as if chosen by God Himself, symbols of strength, perfection, and divine authority. But behind the walls of their golden castles, history whispers a far darker truth. A truth of sorrow, secrecy, and children whose births did not bring celebration but fear. Because not every royal child was born healthy. And when a baby entered the world with deformities, illness, or hidden conditions, it threatened not only a family's happiness, but the very survival of a dynasty. In societies where bloodlines meant everything, the weakness of a single child could ignite a national crisis. These were not just private tragedies. They were events that reshaped kingdoms and altered the course of history. The birth of a royal baby was never private. From the moment a queen went into labor, an entire nation waited in suspense. A healthy boy meant stability, alliances, and the promise of continuity. But when a child was born frail, deformed, or too weak to survive, the consequences stretched. Far beyond the nursery, in the world of monarchy, a deformity was not seen as a medical misfortune, was viewed as divine judgment. A curse upon the family, a sign that God had withdrawn His blessing. Monarchs ruled not only through politics, but through image. Perception mattered as much as power itself, and nothing shattered that image faster than a weak or imperfect heir. One of the most infamous examples was the mighty Habsburg dynasty. It's the most powerful family in Europe. Their empire stretched from Spain to Austria, the Netherlands to the New World. Yet behind the glittering crowns lay a hidden weakness, centuries of inbreeding. Determined to preserve their pure bloodline, they married within their own family for generations. The result was devastating. Nowhere was this more tragic than in the life of King Charles II of Spain. Born in 1661, Charles was the last male heir of the Spanish Habsburgs, the boy upon whom the hopes of an empire rested. But his birth marked not the continuation of the dynasty, but the beginning of its downfall. Charles inherited the infamous Habsburg Josso, enlarged and deformed. That his lower lip jutted grotesquely, making it nearly impossible for him to chew or speak clearly. His tongue was oversized, causing constant drooling and slurred speech. His body was frail and underdeveloped. He did not walk until the age of 8, and even then his steps were weak and unsteady. His mind, too, was impaired, though he was tutored by priests. Charles struggled to learn even the simplest tasks. Foreign ambassadors described him as feeble-minded, bewitched, almost childlike in his ignorance. Indeed, many Spaniards came to believe he was cursed, calling him El Hechizado, the Bewitched. Yet this fragile boy was crowned king. He sat upon the throne of one of Europe's greatest empires, a realm that demanded strength and vision. Instead, Charles became a puppet controlled by courtiers, foreign powers, and even his own family. But perhaps the greatest tragedy of all was his inability to father an heir. Despite 2 marriages, Charles remained childless. His infertility sealed the doom of the Spanish Habsburg line. When he died in 1700, at just 38 years old, he left behind no successor. His death triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, conflict that engulfed Europe and permanently shifted the balance of power. One man's deformities, born of centuries of inbreeding, had brought down an empire. England, too, knew the burden of fragile heirs. Before Henry VIII became infamous for his 6 wives, there was his elder brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales. Arthur was the great hope of the Tudors, handsome, intelligent, and married to Catherine of Aragon. His union with Catherine promised a golden alliance between England and Spain. But Arthur's health was weak, his body pale and frail. Just months after his marriage, he fell gravely ill, likely from tuberculosis or the dreaded sweating sickness. At only 15 years old, Arthur died, leaving his young widow heartbroken. His death changed the course of English history forever. His younger brother Henry suddenly became heir. When Henry later married Arthur's widow, Catherine, it set off a chain of events that reshaped England. Henry's desperate quest for a male heir, his break from the Catholic Church, the English Reformation, and centuries of religious conflict. The fragile life of one boy had altered the destiny of a nation. France was no stranger to such tragedies. The Bourbon dynasty projected grandeur and absolute power. Louis XIV, the Sun King, embodied majesty with glittering palaces and endless ceremony, but behind the polished facade, royal children who were born with deformities or illnesses were often hidden away, erased from history. Some died in infancy, their names never spoken again. Others were raised in secrecy, far from the public. So the illusion of perfection could be preserved. The most heartbreaking tale came a century later. During the reign of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, their son Louis Charles, the Dauphin of France, was born in 1785, a symbol of hope during troubled times. But fate was cruel. When the French Revolution erupted, his world collapsed. His parents were executed, and the boy, already frail from illness, was thrown into a dark prison cell. Neglected and abused, he wasted away. At just 10 years old, he died in captivity, his small body broken not only by sickness, but by cruelty. The boy who should have been Louis XVII became instead a tragic symbol of a collapsing monarchy. Death marked the end of innocence for the Bourbons, a haunting reminder that even children were not spared the storms of history. Perhaps no royal tragedy is more infamous than that. The Romanovs, Russia's last imperial family. For Tsar Nicholas II and his wife Alexandra, the birth of a son in 1904 was a moment of triumph. After 4 daughters, a male heir, Alexei, was finally born. But joy quickly turned to fear. Alexei suffered from hemophilia, a genetic blood disorder that prevented his blood from clotting. Even the smallest bruise or cut could be fatal. This condition, inherited from Queen Victoria of Britain, had spread like a curse through Europe's royal families. For the Romanovs, it was devastating. Every fall, every injury sent the court into panic, desperate to save their son, the royal family placed their trust in a mystic healer, Grigory Rasputin, who seemed able to ease Alexei's suffering. But Rasputin's growing influence created scandal and suspicion, feeding the belief that the monarchy was under the control of a madman. As Russia descended into revolution, Alexei's illness became more than a private tragedy. It became a symbol of imperial weakness. When the Romanovs were executed in 1918, Alexei was just 13 years old. His short, pain-filled life had played a part in the collapse of one of the most powerful dynasties in the world. Queens. Burden that few could imagine. Their worth was often measured not by wisdom or influence, but by their ability to produce strong, healthy heirs. When children were born sickly or deformed, blame almost always fell upon the mother. Queen Anne of England knew this suffering. More than anyone, over her lifetime, she endured 17 pregnancies. 17 times, she carried the hope of a dynasty. Yet fate was merciless. Miscarriages, stillbirths, and infant deaths followed one after another. Only one child, Prince William, survived infancy, and he too died at the age of 11. Anne herself died in 1714. The Stuart line ended. The crown passed to the Hanoverians, changing Britain's future forever. Anne's private grief became a national crisis, a painful reminder that empires could crumble not only on battlefields, but in nurseries. For every royal child whose name survives in history, there are countless others whose stories were erased. Many infants born with deformities were hidden away, placed in monasteries, or quietly buried in unmarked graves. To acknowledge them was to admit weakness, and monarchs could not afford that risk, so silence became the weapon of choice. Entire generations of children were lost to secrecy, yet, in rare cases, the silence was broken. Queen Victoria of Britain, for example, refused to hide her daughter, Princess Victoria, who suffered from a spinal deformity. Though her life was filled with pain, she remained a visible part of the royal family, a quiet defiance of centuries of shame. History often paints monarchy in gold and glory. But behind the crowns and castles, there is another story, a story of fragile heirs, broken bloodlines, and the children whose suffering shaped the destinies of nations.